everybody. This is Danny from Marvin. This is another episode of Tips, Noodles and Shreddin. I wanted to make another discussion type video about aesthetics, about postmodernism, and this is actually a reaction to a conversation I recently had with a frenemy of Marvin who doesn't like our music. He thinks it's too busy, thinks less is more type person, and made me really think about what these people think about music and about what some of you should avoid as people. Now, one thing they keep talking about is ego in music. They think that this music is self-indulgent. They think that you do some things to show off. And I want to address this because especially if you go to school, you're going to run into a lot of people who talk about your ego. Now, first of all, ego is not a musical term. We learn and study music to kill it and to sound good and to shred, right? You might not want to shred, but you definitely want to sound great. Ego is maybe something that Hindus are trying to defeat and Freud tries to understand. But as a guitarist or saxophonist or drummer, ego has very little role in your life. We're not trying to be monks here, right? Charlie Parker, there's a very famous story about him getting a blowjob in a taxi while eating fried chicken while Miles Davis was watching. Right? He was not an enlightened person in the classical sense. And Miles Davis himself, who was a less is more kind of person, if you hear him talk, he's crazier than fucking Trump. It's like total egomaniac. So we're talking about people whose moral compass was questionable at best and were probably pretty tripping about themselves. So this defeat of the ego is a silly kind of pursuit. And I think that this idea of disappearing, as a person and letting the music flow through you is false. I don't think that's how it works. What we do is through being not ignorant, like acquiring knowledge and skill and going into an internal kind of search, we get closer and closer to our aesthetics, and then they become kind of the general aesthetics, for people who know what they're doing. Now, in previous Noodles and Shreds, I was talking about postmodernism and why it's bad. That thing of everything being equal. A fart smells as good as roses and a knife feels as good as satin type idea applied to music. But ridiculous as that is, this was my big revelation. When I was talking to people who hide behind this kind of thing, I realized they're not postmodernists. Meaning it's not a conversation between two intellectuals. They didn't read Foucault, they didn't read Derrida. They're just hiding behind a part of that idea. But really, it's a battle between the monkey, ape kind of brain and enlightened people who use their language part of the brain, use their minds to absorb music. All these people are saying, really, the people that will question you for being egotistical and say that you're self-indulgent for studying and for playing stuff that's complex, they're saying nobody wants to hear that. Nobody wants to hear that complicated music. We don't want to think. We want to just feel a groove and move, dance around the fire. They want to shoot to your sensory part of to the sensory part of your body, to your kind of internal feeling of rhythm and to your very simplest aesthetics. You see, when you watch the Discovery Channel, you see two lions hanging out in nature in the sun. They're happy. There's nothing to do. There's nothing to accomplish. If you ate and slept, you're happy. We all of our language, part of our being, is sitting on top of this animal part of our being. And if you shoot to the animals part of your being, you can make very simple music that's going to be very pleasing physically. The thing is, we've evolved. So we have this word kind of society thing, built on top of that. And it's really a construct and you inherit it. So it's sitting on jazz music, on classical music, on tradition. And it's your responsibility as a creator to embrace it and move it forward, in my opinion. Now, I think the thing that would lead a person to believe that kind of, to support this ape thing hiding behind postmodernism is this. A 17-year-old gets to a music college. He's frightened. He sounds terrible. He doesn't know what to do, right? And then he's faced with a person like Charlie Parker or Mingus or whoever, that's light years ahead of them. What most people should do is feel terrible about themselves, feel ashamed of how they sound, and go into a long path of study to pull themselves out of it and become something eventually. What some people do is look at the terrible people around them and say, well, everything's equal. There's nothing to accomplish, nothing to do. Sound is sound. And, and the problem with our times is that we have, like, you go to jazz school, there's avant-garde players, there's modern jazz players, there's people who play really out sound and stuff that doesn't sound very good, but get a lot of attention from the clique. So the aesthetics can get skewed. To me, there's nothing more ego-driven, if you're talking about ego, than for your own self-protection, to feel good about yourself, you're willing to sacrifice language and the things you actually instinctively feel about music, not to trust your natural aesthetics and how you interpret aesthetically, the music that's around you, and abandon those systems for the sake of feeling good about yourself. That's an ego-driven thing to do. That's putting your own feelings ahead of society and culture as a whole. So the one thing that also upsets these kind of people more than anything is admitting that experts exist. Like for me, I think, I know I am an expert on guitar. I have spent my entire life studying it, right? But for those people, there's no difference between an expert and a novice, in terms of your skill doesn't prove any sort of merit or value. And the danger of this kind of thinking is that schools of thought can't be developed. Now think about this. What's a school of thought? A school of thought is when you have experts that are in agreement, a few or one, that can define language to create a set of results. And then people follow their definitions of language to create similar results, right? Like Charlie Parker created the bebop school of thought. He studied a certain way, he believed certain things about certain things, and created an aesthetic. And then people could follow in the footsteps. I put up a video about the way me and Danny Markovich see scales, and the systems we use for scales, the systems we use for rhythm. Now, do I think it's the only system? I know it's not the only system. I know different people think different ways. But the thing is, I think it's the best system to do what we do. It's a very efficient system, and if you're judging me by what I have done in music, and you agree that it's something of quality, then I'm also showing you, well, this is how I think about it. So I think admitting that some people, when somebody gives their life to something, they get to decide how to organize the information and the knowledge that they acquire into names. Now, the problem nowadays is that people, because nobody really admits that, it's kind of become impolite to just point out that some people are experts, some people are novices, some people are intermediate. Everybody assumes that they say that we use the same words and we mean the same things. But for me, when I say harmony, that goes into a world of interconnected ideas and study that already happened in my mind. And when a person I'm arguing with uses the same word, it's a pretty blank kind of idea in their mind. So I think the point I'm trying to make, like in the other video, is first of all, for those of you who are young and are thinking about becoming an ape instead of a human being, I encourage you to use your brain and to move the music forward, not backward. That's for you. And for those of you guys who have already committed to the less and more thing, it's not too late. You can come back. You can, there's nothing wrong with sophisticated music and with complexity. And just because you can't understand certain things doesn't mean that they don't have value, and shooting towards the aesthetic of the masses is a pretty bad idea. We have enough of that going on in the world right now. See you later.